Yeah. It comes around once a month, whether I like it or not.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
This is, you're welcome.
So have a good period, Bob. Yeah. It's just, you know, work with that, but they're good.
How are you doing? Basketball. Roll out. I'm gonna try to, yeah, I probably told my wife, maybe it work because a lot more sharing. Got big house. Might have to change. Yeah, we might switch. I might be in a wheelchair all weekend. An hour of basketball.
Yeah, so it's still downtown.
I figured that I didn't realize last night.
So it's a bunch of years.
Yeah. Around the castle. He doesn't even ask. Punishment and you can go in bed. I've never seen
I'm recording.
Yeah, now we're all back then. Yeah, it would be on the very yeah, it's kind of every year. Sean is good to see you. Hey, very good to meet you. Hey, just like doing great. I thought you were meeting last week. Yeah.
I try. I mean, it's hard to remember all the stuff we've done.
Always good.
No, Larry, you know, bro.
Hell, maybe. I'm not.
That's why I was gonna- Yeah, Daddy had some kind of fancy event.
Yeah. Garrett's,
Garrett Kent.
Very, very
well.
You know. No, they're.
We're in a building at.
Anything?
Last.
They had,
Building. Right by the county. Right down the street.
Yeah.
Oh, it was, well, it wasn't.
Vehicles.
That's right next door. to the old building.
Yeah.
It's next to you. It's a red brick building. Six. The signage out front still says. school seat. Yeah, one of the Fox series.
In progress.
Okay, I'm sorry, we don't have mics today, so I'll try to speak up. I'll put on my mom voice here for us. I know we've got folks on camera. Can y'all thumbs up if you can hear me or not? Can you hear? No?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, okay, if you start losing sound, please let us know. Anyway, we appreciate, I'll officially call this meeting to order, the Energy Resources Council. Today, October 20th, and getting a few minute late start, but appreciate those that were able to attend in person and also those that are joining us by Zoom. I know we also have Arcan broadcasting this for those of the public and other folks that have interest in the proceedings today, and I think there's a lot to talk about. After coming from a 22-degree morning yesterday in Northwest Arkansas, seems early in the season to me, that just is a careful reminder that our weather, we're in Arkansas, and our weather can change on the moment, and maybe every moment, but it's nice to see the warm come back for a few hours or a few days, but we know that we, as a state, have to stand ready for various weather changes and weather situations. And that resonates with me at my department. I was also up in Wisconsin last week and encountered my first snowfall, but it was actually 32 degrees and it melted in 2 hours. Very similar to Arkansas, right? So it was colder when I got home, but I appreciate all that y'all do and what you do in terms of the energy resources. I know I was at a meeting, I believe it was last week, in the last few weeks, where the governor was speaking to our Advanced Energy Association, talking about a number of progress points that they've encountered, but he brought up the task force and then the resulting recommendation to form the Energy Resources Council as a legacy action of his administration, not in response, but partially at least reflecting on the fact that Arkansas needs to be ready, stand ready for these events and to avoid potential risk to our public or risk to public safety or to even public health when we encounter a shortage as we did back in the previous ice storm Uri. And unfortunately, we did not see the impacts that some of our neighboring states did. But I know a number of recommendations have come across all the states. A number of you have been very active in, I guess, looking at after action, if you will, assessment of those events and how you can help your company or your customers be prepared. But we also at the state have been looking at our policies and evaluate that. So just appreciate all the hard work. I think Arkansas is well positioned, as our report showed, as a result of your testimony and others on the task force report, to be ready at all times. But the governor reminded us in this meeting, and I now have been reminding some folks at the national level as we talk about infrastructure investments that are going forth across our country as a result of some of the federal dollars, that we have to look for, first and foremost, energy security for our country. We know that at any time we don't have energy security, we put ourselves in a vulnerable state. And I think it's important that we don't exacerbate that vulnerabilities, and we don't want to be in the situation that Europe's found themselves in coming into this winter, and the exorbitant inflation, but also the exorbitant potential just unavailability of fuel that's going to be critical for heating homes and heating industries across the country. So I appreciate that. There's a lot of outreach, and I've been meeting with folks both at the state level and national level. There's a lot of folks in the industry trying to help and assist Europe, and I think that shows the spirit of the United States, that we want to be not only our own, we not only want to ensure our own security, but we want to help those that are vulnerable at this time due to whatever factors, be it war, be it situation. So, but that's an important thing. The second pillar, if you will, of our energy policy is affordability. And I think that's always been a strength of Arkansas, to provide affordable utilities and affordable resources to our customers and to the public. And we have to keep that in mind, that in itself is about having good access, for all our citizens, because as the costs go up, access becomes generally harder for certain, especially our at-risk communities. And so we don't want to be counterproductive as we look at things and as we look at solutions long-term, as we're looking at what does our mix look like down the road, that we keep affordability as a cornerstone of what we do. I'll let PSC talk about reliability, but I know that's kind of first and foremost of making sure that we always can have a reliable source coming in. And I remember a few weeks ago, John, I think you were there. There was some testimony on some of our intermittent, advanced energy sources. And the comment was, well, and I guess it's to your point, MISO, and well, they'll make sure everybody always has power. Our RTOs can make sure that everyone has power 24/7. And I was like,
The problem is we don't own anything.
that's, I think the point when then the answer was made, well, they're going to get it. They're going to pick, they're going to invite the bid in to deliver the electron, or deliver perhaps in the fuel state natural gas. But if the electrons and molecules aren't there, that's not something they can work on. So the production of energy is where this group is really focused on it, and the delivery in an economical and safe way. And then lastly, I add certainty in there. That's that 24/7 thing. And that's where I think we intersect with PSC, with the RTOs, with all of you, to make sure, and the public, to make sure that our resources are 24/7 resources. And that's the only way I think that we can have a policy that, invites cleaner solutions, but also invites affordable and all those other parameters. So I'll stop there with that. That's just kind of my pitch. I know there's a lot of incentives that have come forward, and we look at those. And while I think I actually had an interview this morning about the role the federal government's playing, given some of the laws and the infrastructure investments in IRA, and how that's affected, how do states respond to that in terms of maintaining the flexibility and the uniqueness? And my comment there was, I think the states will need to, we are quite different from state to state. I mean, I always say I have 3 children, and they were all incentivized differently to be successful. And so you can't have a one size approach to energy, I don't think, across this country. So I want to make sure that we're doing those things. But I said, where we have a lot of common across our states and our region especially, we also have some differences, but it's those differences that I think bring about our strengths, and often it's in those differences that our strengths lie. And so we should find ways to build up and use those strengths to our advantage. So with that, I'll just welcome again all of you. I would love to, I hope to hear from most of you on what you learned and what you see as an important thing. We assembled this meeting, I guess, as a follow-up to one we held earlier spring, and all of you, I believe you know, Larry Bingle has taken on a role as our Chief Administrator of Energy at the Department of Energy and Environment, bringing together our separate entities, helping make sure they're having weekly conversations in the department. I believe y'all are doing, and weekly conversations, reporting up to me on things that can better and strengthen Arkansas in the energy forefront. So anytime you can reach out to him if you have thoughts or ideas or recommendations. But so with that, I would love to kind of go around the table and introduce those that are attending today. I know some of you have attended before, but and to encourage you to be part of this, not just, this is not a meeting, this is a true functioning working group. I believe someone used that term. But maybe more than that, I think it's about energy leadership for our state. And I consider you all energy leaders, or your entities leaders. And it's important. I don't think we will be successful if we're not all at the table having these conversations, you know, early, and maybe not as often as, you know, but often is a relative term. But you know, if it's a once a year basis, this group can decide a twice a year basis, though we wanted to come back together in this meeting to get some reports, but also to talk about a toolkit that was the vision of the task force, the recommendation, and that has really been evolving through the efforts of Administrator Bingle and his team, working to see, and many of you have contributed. If you haven't contributed, then we're going to invite you to contribute after this discussion, because it's a work, I think it's a work in progress. Is that a fair statement? And we're not trying to.
It's a living.
It's a living toolkit. So if you see something you can add and make it more meaningful for your customer base, or your, you know, even within your own organization, this is intended to make things more transparent, increase communication, increase resources, help people just understand how energy works across our state. So that we'll roll that out. And then of course we have some additional I think we have presentation from Southwest Power Pool. And then Entergy has agreed to present. I believe we had a third presenter, but due to the scheduling change, and I appreciate all the accommodations. I know we got a few people that might not have been able to attend the first day, but we're appreciative of that. But we did, I think one of our presentations will probably just be deferred to a future meeting anyway. But with that, I'll stop. Welcome today, and let's see where we can go with this. And I'm looking forward to hearing more and getting your input. So I'm gonna take chair's prerogative and maybe just go to my left, and then we can go around the room and just introduce ourselves, but that's fine. And speak up for the, and then we'll come to you on the camera. I know you're a valid part of our meeting, and we want you to be able to contribute to in our conversation. So you want to start here, and then we'll come to the camera or the Zoom participants at the end.
My name is Jordan Tinsley. I'm an attorney at Tinsley and Youngdahl PLLC, which is a law firm here in Little Rock, and I am counsel for Arkansas Electric Energy Consumers Incorporated and Arkansas Gas Consumers Incorporated.
My name is Garrett Kent. I'm here as a representative of the Arkansas Gas Consumers Group. I work for a commercial metals company as their energy manager.
I'm Kip Miller. I'm the VP of Public Affairs at OG&E.
Travis Matlock, representing AMPA, the 15 municipal electric providers within the state of Arkansas. I am from the city of Bentonville, and I'm the electric utility director in Bentonville.
And that's where the cold is, right?
And it was very cold yesterday.
I'm Tommy Maxwell. I'm representing the Arkansas Forest and Paper Council, made up primarily of large users of electricity, paper companies, industrial companies, wood products manufacturing companies. Brent is my sidekick, so he keeps me straight.
Got it. Everybody needs one. Daryl Brown with MISO.
Larry Bingle, I'm Chief Administrator for Energy at the Energy and Environment. And under our new transformation, we have liquefied petroleum gas board, on gas commission, development survey, and our energy office, which allows us to bring together all the various energy issues and discuss them across departments. And before we were just siloed, how we can have those cross agency discussions.
Paul Sesky with Southwest Power Pool.
John Bethel, Director of Public Affairs with Energy Arkansas.
I'm Julie Benefield. For the last 7 years and 9 months, I have been the Chief Deputy Attorney General, and I plan to be for the next 3 months. So this may very well be my first and last meeting, but I look forward to everything you have to say.
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate the role of the Attorney General in this conversation.
I'm Kenny Henderson, I'm Vice President of Government Relations with Sun Utilities.
Chad Kinsley, Vice President of Operations for Black Hills Energy.
I'm Ron Craft, representing Arkansas Propane Gas Association.
All right, and we switched, I think we have Cindy Ireland, you wanna, I guess I'm gonna introduce you while you introduce yourself. So can you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm Cindy Ireland, and I'm the Director of Research and Policy for the Public Service Commission. Chair Anderson was unable to attend today.
Thank you so much, Cindy, for participating. I know Commissioner Flynn reached out, and I appreciate the role that y'all play as well. This is important that you be at the table. So Joelle Cannon, are you on the line?
Yeah, I am. Let's see if I can figure it out. Can you I moved my screens around? Can you see me? I'm Joelle. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Liberty Utilities. We have about 7,000. We have about 5,000 water customers and 20,000 water customers and 7,000 electric customers in Arkansas. And we also have David Pham on the line as well with us, and he's from our transmissions and operations side.
And I believe we have a second representative from Summit Utilities online. Do you want to introduce yourself, Jeffrey? Perhaps not. I have a note that you have someone else.
That's JT Toys, I believe. He's
Oh,
right.
JT. Okay. Thank you for that. Well, did I leave anyone out? Now, I know I would be remiss not to recognize the staff over here from E&E. They work closely across our department on a number of key issues, as well as my chief counsel, Stephanie in the room, Shane Cleary, who stays, keeps me honest most of the time. But we have a number of folks that have staffed this committee, including Tricia Trees and Pilkington. Beth, I'm not going to give you. So you don't, do y'all want to recognize yourself? Go ahead. Introduce yourself.
I'm Beth Thompson in Communications with the Department of Energy and Environment.
I'm Carrie Sue Goodson. I'm the Executive Assistant to the Secretary.
I'm Daniel Pilkington. I'm an attorney here with the department.
Tricia Tree, Stephanie Associate Director for Office of Air, and then also helping with the infrastructure.
Got a few folks in the audience. Do y'all want to?
Yeah, Charlie Spakes, Government Affairs for Black Hills Energy.
I'm Larry Chisenhall, outside counsel for a number of people here, and Kim Miller's driver today.
And then over on this side of the room.
Troy Deal, Director of Scheduling with E&E.
Donnelly Davis, Chief of Communications.
Yeah, we appreciate Donnelly and Troy and all the work that this staff did. So let's give them a round of applause. With that, we'll move on. I believe it's time for me to turn it over to the Southwest Power Pool for a presentation. Take the mic, but we don't ask.
Yes, well, I'll take the imaginary mic. Well, thank you for the invitation to come out and share with you what SPP has done as a result of Winter Storm Uri, a historic weather event in February 2021. You'll see some data and slides. Literally what's historic is we've not seen weather like this in over 100 years. What I hope to do is do a high-level introduction to who SPP is and what we do, similar to MISO. and then transition to a little bit of high level of what we saw during this historical event, and then talk about what we are doing as a result of the report we issued and the implementation of improvements to try to address if this weather pattern ever happens again, which we hope it doesn't, but to be better prepared next time. Jim, can you go next slide? Next slide, please. So this gives you a map, a feel of the RTOs in the United States. We are the one in the middle in the maroon, just to our east, both northeast and southeast of us. And we cross over a great deal in the Dakotas. It's MISO. And you see ERCOT that I'll talk about in a bit, which is most of Texas, but not all of Texas. And then you'll see PJM, New York, New England ISO, and the Cal ISO, and a couple in Canada. But what we do is, this is a map, and we're the operators of the electric grid in these areas at the wholesale level, where we try to match energy with load in the most economic and reliable manner. Next slide, please. This gives you an example of what role we play, which is on the left, and on the right would be what utilities play, like Liberty or Entergy. On the left, we help provide the wholesale energy market from the power plants to move to the system, and then it gets to the demand side, where at that point, the local utilities distribute to their customers. Next slide, please. One analogy our past CEO, Nick Brown, came up with, I thought it's a great analogy because a lot have picked it up, is where air traffic controllers. As Daryl mentioned earlier, we do not own the transmission, we do not own the generation, but we simply direct it to be efficient and safe, and try to move in a non-discriminatory way to make sure we keep the lights on. Next slide. So this is something I'll spend a little bit of time pointing out Texas, and we'll talk about some of the challenges ERCOT had. North America has, or the United States is part of 3 interconnects. You have the Eastern Interconnect, which you can see is the eastern part of the U.S., generally east of the Rockies, and then you have the west of the Rockies, or east, just east of the Rocky states, I should say, moving west. And it goes all the way into Canada. Texas is in many ways somewhat islanded. There are DC ties between us and Texas where we can send power to ERCOT, but they have their own system that have connections by DC ties, but they are not AC synchronous with the East or Western Interconnect. Interesting, when you take a look at history, in 2005, there was a historic blackout. If you will recall, New York City was blacked out. Everybody assumed it was a terrorist event, but it was not. But electricity all the way to Canada, because something happened, I think in Indiana, Ohio region, they were out for like a week in Canada. That is how interconnected our electric grid is. And I'll tell you a fascinating story with the help we received. Correct me on the numbers here, Daryl, but I think PJM, which is east of MISO, was sending them 12,000 megawatts of power, and y'all were sending us between 5 and 6, pressuring the system to help us keep the lights on. Very interconnected, and we cannot work in these challenges situations without others. I will say we sent as much power as we could to ERCOT, but when we faced under the protocols and our governance, when we faced the risk of having to do rolling blackouts, we had to cut the power to Texas. Similarly, when MISO was tight, they had to cut their imports to us. And it was at that point that we didn't have enough power to meet our run. So it's very interconnected, and we rely heavily on each other. Next slide.
Those policies internal governmental demands.
It's approved through the industry, NERC and FERC standards, and what the policies are. You have duties to help your neighbors. Okay. You must help your neighbors. But if you're at a point you can't help your neighbor anymore, you got to work to preserve your life.
That's made internally by the
I would know.
It's not a government.
I would say it's part of NERC,
Okay.
federal standards required by.
And it can be reviewed.
Correct.
Penalties.
Good
Subject
question.
to review for penalties. Okay.
Absolutely. Good. So now we're going to talk about our emergency framework. Let's go into your question. Great segue. So utilities must comply with mandated enforceable NERC standards. Actually, it was after the early 2000 event I mentioned earlier, the EPAC 2005. So that may have been 2003 that event happened. But anyway, EPAC 2005 enforceable by penalties of over $1 million violation. So they were a part of the 2003 blackout. Their standards have to meet. NERC regularly audits SPP, like they audit all electric utilities. And then NERC directs how SPP must handle with these emergencies. I will say after the events in, there was a 2018, which we had in the southern part of the country. And after this one, a lot of NERC standards were adjusted and modified to try to make those procedures and policies more effective. But NERC, obviously, the federal government approves these standards and we have to follow these various directives. Next slide, please. And this kind of gives you an idea of how on the left is how what we define as levels of operation, and on the right are NERC defined levels of operation. Today, we're in the green, which is good news. We're in normal operations. I'd say 99.9% of the time, that's where we are. We're kind of like weathermen. When the weather's nice out, it's boring and nice, but then when the weather's difficult, tornadoes, storms, then we get a lot of activity.
Yeah, Paul, I want to interject. We actually have 2 meteorologists, I'm sure y'all do as well, on our staff. So
it's a big part from whether looking at resources you're going to need or resources available on the system. Then you go into weather advisories. We see something on a horizon that we put out advisories, then resource advisories, whereas it's going to be tight, but having enough generation to meet load. And then you issue directives to go into conservative operations. That means the plant operators need to be more conservative in how they operate. And then there's max gen alert, was you need to generate everything you can at that point in time because one of the birds losing enough power for the grid.
Who are the recipients of those notifications?
They would be the general, well, sparse somewhat, I'll talk a bit, it's the public, it's the utilities, and they have, put it this way, Southwest Power Pole tells somebody in North Dakota, you need to do this, they're like, who's Southwest Power Pole? But the local utilities would give some of those advisories to customers. And then we would give those advisories like MISO to the plant operators to prepare.
So your communications are going to the utilities and the production assets themselves. And then in terms of passing those through to customers, that's regarded as their obligation.
We both do it, but I would say for the most part, and Darryl, love your thoughts, for the most part, it's the local utilities.
Okay, thank you.
And that's, I will jump ahead. The toolkit is designed to help facilitate that communication, perhaps improve on how it's done to not necessarily increase workload, but to be able to be more transparent to the public. So we can talk about that if y'all have ideas on that or you have ideas.
Absolutely.
And Jordan, I'm gonna talk about that some later on too, is that our approach is to discuss with the interruptible customers, certainly directly as a part of that relationship. And then also we engaged in a lot of broad communications through several channels with all of our customers to notify them of the potential at that time.
Hey,
I think other utilities did the same thing.
the best way to know, we have an app now. We didn't have it at the time of Uri. There's an app out there where you can sign up and get updates. So as far as communication,
That's great. And
it's all right here.
that should be part of what we inform on our website.
I don't think you can
I
give
mean,
more.
if the power's out, it doesn't help you necessarily, but with the phone, sometimes you can continue
Yes.
that
Set your
communication.
fingers
Yeah.
up.
So that's great.
I will say, I'll use that to point out, as you recall, a couple of weeks ago, California had record heat. We are a reliability coordinator of the Western Interconnect, so we're sitting on the map, but we interact a lot in the Western Interconnect. The way they helped shed thousands of megawatts was a blast text to ask people to curb their usage. And that had a huge impact. So not a good way to run the grid, but it was effective in getting demand to drop.
I wouldn't swear by it, but I would tell you that when we put out our conservative ops, I think a lot of people turn their heat up. Let me make sure I get it nice and toasty.
In case my power goes off.
I'm not sure everybody complies.
Good point.
Just hope there's enough to counterbalance. So, and then on the right, you have the NERC defined levels, Larry, if you have, but today it's not up there, we're at EEA 0, we're just in easy operations. Then we go to EEA 1, that is where you issue an alert that all available generators need to get ready to be committed or are committed. EEA 2, which we are on the verge of not having enough power to meet load. This is when, in the oversimplification, the operators get their calculators out and they start measuring how much load do we got prepared to shed. And then EEA 3 is where you're actually interrupting load and how it's interrupted and chosen standards and protocols that are set through the industry. I'll talk a little bit about that. Can you go next slide, Troy? Next slide. So here's the facts of the event. 73% of the United States had snow cover.
Wow.
There were 3,000 daily and 79 all-time local records. The only comparable historical snap was 1899 and 1905, over a 100-year event. Next slide. So this is a map, again, it shows you the RTO map, but I want to really draw attention to the dark blue color. That is not below freezing temperatures, that is below zero. I'll repeat, that's not below freezing, that's below zero temperature. You look at our footprint, about 98% of our footprint was below zero. As y'all know, West Texas, Southwest Arkansas, Northeast Texas is not used to those weather conditions. It was right on the top of us, and this is the 4 days of the main part of the event. Valentine's Day, February 14th to the 16th. A significant event that happened and really stressed the system, both the electric system and the gas. Next slide, please. So this is what took place following the procedures and process we talked about on February 4th. This is 10 days out. We put out an alert saying cold weather is coming, be aware. On the 8th, we did the resource alert. It said beware. On the 11th, we committed generators, long lead generators. Let me explain how our markets work. Daryl, Mito's market SPP and all RTOs, they have a day ahead market. You have supply bids for the day ahead and you have demand bids. We match them reliably, most productive, and you ask them to clear the day ahead. On the 11th, we issued a directive for over 300 generators to get ready and run for this upcoming event. Before that, the most generators we'd ever told that to was 11. So you can see the magnitude of what we saw coming. Then public appeals were put out. We put some out, the local, yes.
Is there a way to sort of identify the types of generators that you were appealing to? I mean, are those primarily coal fires, load following plants?
They were with 300, all of them. When I say 11,
More of everything.
11 would be like you have a massive generator or a massive transmission line out in a region, and you need all those generators in that region around. This was everybody. You know, you can't tell a wind farm or a solar farm to, hey, gear up. But it was primarily gas because we're heavy in gas. But we told them all to get ready to run.
Why are they load following? I mean, why were they not running?
Well, there is never a point in time where every generator is online. There is never a point in time where every transmission line is online. So you're just telling everyone out there, get ready to go.
Okay. I'm just trying to do some little math here. Okay.
Sure.
300 generators. They're either natural gas or coal or something. Okay. So as we transition from coal and natural gas to solar and wind, and you can't get them to gear up, another event like this hits, and still weather, winds, cold, no sun. So what happens to your footprint where you were at this point below zero if something like that would ever occur again? And because we're environmentally conscious, we're with no electricity. I'm just curious.
Sure.
Maybe I shouldn't ask that question.
No, it's a great question, and that's what this industry and this nation's grappling with. How do we handle a transition, and what does it look like? What do you have there to run when you need it? It's a great question.
Storage is gonna be
Yeah.
an important part of that conversation, but I believe generation. I think we all have to be realistic that generation from all sources have to be available for at least.
Not in some folks' minds, is that
But-
the option, but that's okay.
Somebody else had a comment, but we,
Paul, just one quick thing. What about the size and SPP for demand response and things like that? Do you have any idea size in megawatts that you had then versus now or anything like that?
Yeah, well, there are different ways of demand response. One is forced. We're all vertically integrated states. That's largely driven by state policy, not like at our level. And there's not as much in other regions of the country. You do have public appeal demand response, and we saw it. Similar to what California saw with the text, we saw that drop off. Particularly interesting, you saw this in ERCOT, seen this. Now that people know it's real, that your lights can be shed, more people are participating.
Does SPP have something similar to like the LMR program that MISO has, the load modifying resource program, where there are known entities that are registered as being able to shed load and then you can call upon them as necessary?
Yeah, and I can't speak for MISO in our footprint. That's normally done by the local utility level, not at our level.
So
yes, that is out there.
There's not a comparable.
Same for us,
program.
they're identified through our members.
No, I understand that, but do you have the ability to call upon those demand response resources at the RTO level in the SPP system?
I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty certain when we tell the utilities it's tight, they handle that, handle those situations with the customer. I will say like Nebraska has tons of irrigation, tons. In the summer when it's hot, we can call them and it drops quickly. Like you notice it on the system. Obviously, that wasn't a resource available in February. So then you go from public appeals and then you go to the green. Every megawatt we could use, we imported from Saskatchewan Power in Canada. We were imported from Colorado, and we were getting huge imports from MISO, really stressing the system as much as we could. And then we were helping Texas to the extent we could. Every megawatt available was used. And then despite that, on the 15th, we had to shed 1.5% of our load for about 57 minutes. How that works, we tell the transmission operators, it's a load ratio share number. We sent a message out and said, this is what you're directed to shed. And then they made who and which customers are shed and for what duration, that's up to them, but we issue that directive. Then the next day on the 16th, it was higher. We shed 6.5% for 3 hours and 23 minutes. And let me tell you some of the stories. I know MISO faced some of these negative 30 degrees in Iowa and they're shedding load. There were some of the utilities, because they had never done this before, hospitals were shed. It shouldn't have been, but just this industry has never faced that. So significant event, like something we've never seen. I will say the next day on the 17th, we got real close, but we didn't have to move to EA 2 or 3. And then the key is, big picture, we couldn't have done it without work with our neighbors. If we didn't have the work with our neighbors, the transmission build out that we've had, we could easily look like ERCOT. And so it's one thing I always remember, we have great infrastructure in this nation and it's helpful. And we do a study of the cost benefits of our transmission grid. We can't even study the value it had on these days because the models don't even solve. If you took out the transmission we built in the last 10 years and you try to get the grid to solve during these events, it just doesn't solve. So, but for $10 billion in transmission across our footprint, it would have been much worse. So a lot of interesting pictures. So that's a big picture. The event, if you go next slide. These are the reasons for the disruption. First of all, generation unavailability. They had generators that were there, hardware in the ground, but they were just unavailable.
They couldn't get natural gas.
Could not get natural gas being key that I'll talk about a bit. Some icing issues were there. A rapid reduction in imports. MISO couldn't help us out anymore. We lost other imports. So it did that, and then record consumption. It was so cold, everybody was using as much energy as they could to stay warm. Next slide, please. So now some of the key observations. If you could go back one, Troy. So the key thing is unavailable generation and fuel, primarily natural gas. High natural gas prices. To let y'all know the trading floor in the gas industry, that before this event, the computer systems went to $999.99. During the event, they had to override that for bids above $1,000. We saw gas prices go from about $7 to above $1,000. Historic numbers. Next slide. Oh, and some I'll give, but Daryl was alluding to this. I know of 2 utilities in the middle of this went to go buy gas. It was so expensive, they lacked the money, the authority to spend that much money. Had to go to their banks, get lines of credit, and came back and the gas was gone. So they couldn't run the generator. You said something there?
Yeah, I was just saying the buying power.
Do we know anything about the price fixing investigations that were happening around the natural gas markets? Like I know FERC was looking into that. I know the Attorney General's office had open investigation. Is there any kind of progress update on any of that?
I know I probably read it about as much as you do. I don't always great detail of what they have other than curiosity reading.
Yeah.
We'll come back around and maybe if any of them has some information.
Well, it's, obviously it's maybe an elephant in the room, but a lot of people got really rich off of that. The question is, did they need to get rich or did they need to maybe share the wealth a little bit?
I don't know. If you want to continue, we'll come back. This is a
Sure.
good question, I don't think.
Related to this, which I mentioned earlier, increased credit exposure. The short-term credit was an issue at times, and some generators couldn't run because they didn't have the equity or credit to go and buy it. Interconnection with our neighbors, as I mentioned, Daryl and MISO were instrumental in this part. And congestion transmission. It was interesting. There were times, oddly, we had to tell generators to back down.
Yeah.
Well, intuitively, that makes no sense. You need more. But if that generator had kept moving, it would have fried the system and overloaded it. So there was so much congestion, you had some really odd outcomes that you had to see that we just don't see. Next slide, please. And then minimize reliability impact, the execution of the plan that have been on the books for years. We practice, as well as MISO, multiple times a year, practice load shed. Now, many folks never thought we would have to do it, but we practice it routinely. And let me tell you, there's a lot of tension when you're actually directing rolling outages. And so that was effective. And communication was helpful. I will say we were at a level of communication that things we had seen, requests we had seen. I know I was on the phone with Governor Hutchinson, other governors. Some governors, I think, didn't know what an RTO was, but suddenly wanted to ask why. And so a lot of challenges, and that's one thing we've really worked to improve on. If you go next slide, I'll talk about our recommendations. So we did a comprehensive, again, next slide, Troy. We did a comprehensive study and review of what can we do to improve. I'll quickly go over these slides and then show you kind of a scorecard of where we're at. So we had fuel assurance was an issue. Did you have enough fuel to generate? And we tiered the recommendation as FA being fuel assurance 1, and then we labeled them tier 1 as the highest priority, tier 2, and some tier 3s. So fuel assurance was 1. Next slide. Resource planning and availability, how to plan for these events. Next slide, please. Emergency response process and planning. That goes back to when you have to shed load. What is the process and the planning for it? Try to identify those challenges to make sure when you shed load, it's not a critical facility. Next slide. Operating tools and communications. That's where the operators talk to the generators. Next slide. SEAMS agreement. That's agreements with our neighbors. I will say we're involved in a litigation with AECI. It's a large cooperative in Missouri. They sent us power. We paid them under the agreement we have on file with FERC, and they believe they're $38 million short. So we're involved in that issue, but we've adjusted the agreement for future events so that they will be made whole in their perspective. Next slide. Market design improvements. How do we design a market to make sure we have enough generation online? Next slide. Credit and settlements. We did do some modifications to our credit under our tariff to make sure entities have enough credit. One of the issues was interesting. Somebody may not pay MISO, but they can pay us. So FERC is talking about lowering some of the issues to make sure if somebody's involved in each market, we can communicate with each other about those risks. Next slide. Planning improvements. A lot of focus on that, including FERC. Talk about the key is how do you plan for transmission so you can help each other out. Interesting, this winter weather event has caused FERC to talk about having a minimum amount of megawatts thresholds that you can move powers between the RTOs. Next slide. In communications, this is, you can see a level 2 and 3, a lower tier. This is communicating with government entities, with governor's offices, energy offices, commissions, and we've had, this was actually the most engaged process all across stakeholders about how they can communicate with it better. And next slide. Next slide gives you tier 1 updates. We've had the improved reliability, availability, resource availability task force. Ted Thomas was the chair. We will have to fill that with a vacancy. It's a group that developed a number of recommendations about having enough resources. If you look at, and these are some of their 6 initiatives on fuel assurance and 19 on resource planning. Next slide. And this kind of gives you a scorecard. If you look at fuel assurance, we mark it as 52% complete. Green being 100% complete, blue is in process. You can see on fuel assurance 2, we're at 88%. Resource planning 79% and 57% on the others. So we're making a lot of progress, still working. Our board has 5 votes on, Tuesday to implement some of these, and the regional state committee votes on 3 of them on Monday. So we're still in the progress of implementing. Next slide. Then 2 and 3 initiatives. Next slide, not as far along, but just idea, obviously, these were a lesser priority in various aspects, but still making progress and moving on. So you can go next slide. So a big thing is increased planning reserve margin. What that means is you have to have a reserve margin of how much generation you have over your peak. In July, our board and a regional state committee voted to increase that from 12 to 15%. This was a highly debated and discussed issue. You're talking about requiring to have more generation on the grid. That could mean deferred retirements, or it could mean you have to procure new generators, and there's a cost to that. And then also we're looking at having a winter obligation. Today, we only have a binding financial one for the summer. We're looking at moving one in the winter. And that's actually going to be voted on Tuesday as well. Can go next slide. So that summarizes the report, the events, and where we're at. And I look forward to your questions and learning more from John Bethany.
Yeah.
And we didn't hold back, so thank you for allowing our interruption.
Sure,
Through the
anytime.
process. I think that's good to have the interactive discussion. So when I have a couple of questions as chair, but I do, after all of our questions are addressed, I would maybe kind of take an exception to the agenda and go back to you members about if you have updates that you also like to share before we go on to John's formal presentation, or we can reserve that to the end, either way y'all want to do it. But I know that there's other industries, some of the natural gas industry and propane industry that may have some comments that they want to talk about before we go into the winter months. And
I had a question about one of the
okay, well, you go ahead and then I'll ask
initiatives.
my questions after. I'll
Sorry.
defer to you.
Thank you. I noticed that one of the things y'all were advocating for was like a natural gas price cap. I would assume that would have to be enacted through national legislation.
Correct.
And so are you lobbying Congress or?
Yeah, one, we cannot lobby, just the nature of what we do. That was more so for the members and all those involved with in the industry to do that. That's
So
not
is there-
something we do per se.
Action being taken to pursue that?
Some of our, I will say, I've seen letters written by multiple utilities expressing concern. I know during the event, there was a request for the Department of Energy to use some unusual powers to put a cap. I think by the time, probably got vetted and looked at, the authorities and lawyers read up on it, the event had ended. But I do know during the event, there were some calls to DOE to say, we need to look at doing something about that, but never happened.
It's a shame that that momentum would lapse, because I do think that that's a fruitful area for policymaking, because, when you have an event like this and demand is skyrocketing and there are certain people that are well positioned to take advantage of that and, don't have any concerns about doing that, it's too late.
That's a good point. We could follow that up at DOE and see if they're still taking that. I don't know if they came up with a final conclusion on that or not. So maybe we'll take that as an action item, Dan or Tricia, to see what we can find out about. That's an excellent question. I had a couple, and I know Mr. Bingle has one, and I'm sure there may be others. So we talked about ERCOT a lot, or you mentioned ERCOT. I've heard a lot about it in different meetings. And I know that subsequent to all their challenges and unfortunate situations that they encountered, they ended up in the legislature with a number of initiatives, some of which advanced. And I guess, have y'all had a chance to look at some of the requirements? I believe they were more focused on weatherization, maybe storage, or even if, as I understand it, if intermittent sources are put on the grid, to your point over there, that there has to be also an investment in additional capacity so it's available should that intermittent source not be available to the RTO to deliver on it. Have you seen any of have y'all looked at those requirements at all to see if they would be beneficial to Arkansas, or is that's a different, if that's a difference between Texas and Arkansas that we want to keep doing?
Yeah, I will say, I think they were trying to address issues unique to Texas that we don't, or ERCOT that we don't see. I'll say where we have had a lot of discussion with them is possible ways to help the ties so that you can move power back and forth, or to look at different ways to improve how much we could send to them in an emergency, like MISO has before in the past in Texas.
Yeah,
They're also trying to keep their status as
Are they?
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, the weatherization should benefit us too, at least for the natural gas side of it. It was, if the wells are being weatherized differently, perhaps readying them for perhaps extreme events that they hadn't experienced before. So, I mean, I could see there's some benefits across our resource transmission. I know you can talk about how we move gas out of Arkansas from the eastern side of the state, and we bring gas in from Oklahoma and Texas to service our western. And that, the reality is we can't keep it within our state lines and close the door, so to speak. I mean, that's how it works. So it all has to do with pipeline infrastructure. So I guess that was one question. Our federal facilities have talked to me, and in one case, our state military department talked about their experience during the storm. And it probably had less to do with electric. I don't know that they had a risk of electric roll up. I don't think they were prioritized for that. But how do you address, perhaps that kind of security issue? And I guess that question, because I think they did have a risk of gas having the gas company turn them off. I believe Camp Robinson said it was okay because they had guns at their gate. But Pamela Arsenal said that they did have a call or had someone show up, and and so I know they carry out significant security issues for the state, but also for the country. And I just question in response to them is, I don't know if that's your question or maybe someone, as we go around the table, if y'all want to speak to that. I know one of the things we talked about at our affidavits of insurance. So they were going to relook. I recommended Papa Marshall look at an affidavit process with the gas company to make sure they were aware of what the risks are if the gas is terminated, or reduced. In many cases, they can operate at very minimal levels if they're notified, just like industry can, and, having that awareness by the gas company perhaps would be a good exercise to benefit folks. So I don't know if that, maybe that's comment to Summit. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of that particular situation. I'll just say I've been with the company 27 years, and up until this event, I don't recall us ever curtailing a customer. So it was indeed a unique event. And we did wind up having to curtail some of our larger customers. We had human needs affidavits, and we try not to curtail people who had human needs affidavits, but I'm not sure. There may have been some of those that could have been more up to date. And I think we did a pretty good job of following our curtailment tariffs, but it's the first time we've ever really done it. And so there were some responses like that. And so there were situations where we probably did most of the people that they explained to us what the needs were to be backed on. That's
Yeah,
so I don't know if that was one of those situations or not. Generally speaking, our system held up well during the event. Our system held up very well. Our distribution system is really a matter of getting gas in the pipelines. And so there were a lot of nervous times, but really it was fairly limited. But overall, what we had to do, that may have been one of those situations. I just think the specifics of that situation.
Yeah, and I guess perhaps the more significant impacts were where the power generators could just not, you just didn't have the generators able to run due to gas shortage or gas supply, particularly in Texas, I think. Over here.
I'll add just one quick thing is a gas consumer. You can definitely tell a material difference in the contracts that you may have with a third-party gas marketer before storm Erie and after when it comes to OFOs and force majeure. And so it's just very important. The consumers look at that and know what they're saying.
Can I ask a follow-up or really just make a comment on the question about gas transmission? To me, it raises a very important concern about pipeline competition. There's very few pipelines that are bringing large amounts of gas into central Arkansas. Now, I have theories about why. I'm not sure that condition is necessarily going to persist, but from my perspective, state regulators and policymakers should really be asking questions and trying to get a better understanding of why we don't have more pipeline competition. We only have, a very large load in central Arkansas that's seemingly served by one pipeline.
It's an interesting observation. So I guess we have Public Service Commission on the phone, and I would encourage you to carry that back to your commissioners. I guess that's another point, and we'll get to this in a minute. We also have a similar situation with supply of propane, which is critical for a lot of our rural parts of our state. And we'll talk about how we may have some challenges this coming winter, and so what we can do to make the public aware. But I think I owe you a question before we go there.
I know we need to go on, but since the RTOs don't own infrastructure or generating capacity, and we had a question on where you have to call out for power from whoever has a generator fueled by whatever method you're fueling that by. I wonder, how is that decision being made by the power generators? Or what fuels do you use? I don't know, you don't have the answer, but that's a question that's not centralized anymore.
Yeah, so utilities, I'll say from our perspective, have to meet their resource adequacy requirement that's still in the ground that can produce, and how they choose to whatever they choose to use is really up to them. A lot of times you take a look at it, depends on where they're located. So if you're in the plains of Kansas and Nebraska, and you want renewables, they got a lot of good wind. You may not, in North Dakota, you have good wind, but you probably don't have a lot of good solar. If you're a lot of gas in our footprint, because we have abundance of gas being around Oklahoma and Texas, so that's our primary, not fuel source, primary amount of capacity, I'll say.
As RTO, do you look at that and plan for what if that power source would all to switch to just one source?
We study what's in the queue, well, what people have on the system.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. There's an accreditation. So if you have say a nuclear plant that's 100 megawatts, you can accredit them 100 megawatts, except for when they refuel, they're going to be running. A solar farm of 100 megawatts, you can't accredit them 100 megawatts or wind. And then what you do, oddly, the way the formula works, the more wind you have, or the more solar you have, your accreditation drops. Because if you have it all located in one spot and the wind's not blowing in that spot, well, you can't assume there's going to be that much wind. I will say on the Monday and Tuesday, the 2 points in time we had load, wind was producing at its accredited amount. On day 3, it was not, but luckily the temperatures had risen, so the demand wasn't as high.
Do you as RTOs study that? Or do you have concerns about where that may or may not be going within your area? Or do you just, it is what it is, do you deal with it?
So how we would deal with it is the amount of steel you need in the ground goes up. So it's part of it. It's a formula the industry uses. I don't know, Daryl, if you have anything to add there.
Well, back to accreditation also for solar, and it's continuing to go down. For solar, we're using around 40% for solar, and then for wind, it's around 15% range as a generic number. But historical performance has a lot to do with that. And then, that's basically what we're using.
But would you be concerned as an RTO if you did not have a good mix?
We have a whole
Generation
presentation called Minding the Gap. It's basically the scaffolding from where we are today with controllable or dispatchable resources as compared to intermittent resources. There we have one slide that showed 12 days during around a Uri event where the performance of like wind assets was just not what you would hope they would be.
So what would an RTO accept as intermittent? What level of your generating capacity would you?
What is it today?
No, would you accept it as getting to the point where it's too much?
That's a loaded question right there, right?
Yeah, I'd say,
I'm just wondering if.
Does RTO make
yeah,
that choice or does
we don't make that
We
decision.
fuel agnostic.
Yeah, we don't make that decision, that policy, but I always love the analogy, I forget who said it, we're not policy makers, we're policy takers.
Oh,
And so, but ultimately, how.
is there a concern level that you would have?
Yes, and so how it's working is more renewables come on, you're required to have more generation. And so it's not perfect, but there is a formula that requires it.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example.
Battery technology is now where it is.
Oh, yeah, battery technologies coming on can really be the game changer we probably need. So I'll give you an example. Gas generators with firm fuel service had 100% capacity rating. So if you had 100 megawatts, you assumed it was going to be there. Well, we're rethinking this after the winter weather event.
As long as the gas is there.
Correct, but if you got to do it
There's no
based on
guarantee.
historic performance.
And then you have the EPA rules that are coming out, one called a good neighbor rule, where it's having a tremendous impact on people making decisions on just shutting down sooner than they were originally planning to. So it's not any one thing that you have to consider. You have to consider multiple things. And then the performance of even the gas units and the older coal power plants. They're credited. We just passed something at FERC where we're going to 4 seasons versus 1 in terms of how we look at accredited the different generating facilities. So it's our way of saying, hey, you got to be there when we need you because of all the weather events that's taking place. So that becomes financial impacts.
Speaks to that 24/7 question. Did you have a question?
Just one point and then one question is also as you grow your renewable sources, that also it has frequency concerns that you have to watch out for. But one thing on one of your last slides, Paul, you talked about reserve margins going from 12 to 15%. At what point are you forecasting to be at 15%?
It goes into effect, the board's going to approve it on Tuesday,
But,
to be effective next year.
okay, and how much of that 3% in growth is coming from renewable assets?
I wouldn't say it's not coming from renewable assets, it's really coming from load growth. Like our load was 4% higher this summer than a year ago.
Understood.
If you look at our queue, I think it's safe to say that 90% of what's in our queue to be developed is renewables.
But how do you expect the power producers to acquire that much generating capacity that quickly? I mean,
That's a good question. Most are long.
Yeah.
Most meet the 15% today. There's not many, but a few that are worried. So you have two options to get in the generation queue and build it. A lot of them, the complaint of moving that quick was they can't do that, or you buy from your neighbor. So if I'm short 100 megawatts and John has an extra 100 megawatts, I'll write him a check.
but there's a lot of competition for their extra megawatts already,
Correct.
right?
And also
Correct.
300% more wind, when there's no wind, it's still zero.
And I'll add is also how we do it now. If you don't meet it, you pay what we call a capacity payment.
Sure.
Deficiency payment, I should say. And what happens if I'm short 100 megawatts? I pay an amount, it's multiplied, paid to SPP, and then we pay it to the utilities. In my example, John is long, and this will be pro rata, all the load serving entities that are long in generation, they would receive that payment.
Right, but ultimately, whoever's getting hit with that penalty, you would expect them to pass that through to the customers they serve, right?
That's between them and their regulatory construct. It can be a city council, it can be a commission, it can be a co-op board, whatever their
Paul, you
contract
guys
is.
look at any kind of waivers for phase in or?
Yes, so the regional state committee, if you want some really nerdy entertainment on the regulatory construct, we have a meeting on Monday of our regional state committee to talk about a waiver. As I was leaving the office on the phone, there are now 5 proposals on the table among 12 voting members. So it'll be a very unique and entertaining regulatory discussion on that. But yes, we're looking at waivers for that to allow time to phase in.
Okay, I'm gonna take this last question because I know our time is running short. and I wanna
I just
make
got
sure-
one observation about your presentation. When you were talking about communications, all right, and it may be a function of your role, it may be a function of RTO, I don't know. Maybe a combination thereof. But you talked about communicating with governors and other regulatory agencies, and not once did I hear the word customer. So I just have the, how is that done? I mean, you can put it down to energy, but if energy doesn't do it, customers don't get the information. I know the app is there to help. I got it. All right. But I never heard the word customer.
Yeah, I was talking about me personally.
Okay.
We have a communications department working with our members to communicate with them.
Okay.
Actually, we had press conferences during the event with hundreds of people calling, and we got random emails from somebody in West Texas that we serve. Thank you for that. I watched it and I understand better. So, but it was literally the first time we've had to do that. So we got to find ways to do it better.
But typically, you invest on utility, the person you get your power bill. That's who's going to communicate to you what's going to take place. It would be our team.
Is there any problem with having more communication?
I think that's a great segue to our kit. So let's go over this. So, I don't know if that's gonna be, I think Tricia was gonna introduce you to that because that is really a corner, that's really the goal of this kit. To try to, she's gonna demonstrate what we put together so far with your input. And we can talk about where maybe there's some opportunity for improvement based on your thoughts, Jordan, or others. Perhaps not today, but take it home, bring it back. we'd like to get this out before the winter, but I guess the winter happened, so we need to get it out before the snow event or the ice event. Maybe is a better strategy than maybe a temperature event, but anyway.
Can you guys see this okay? I realize it's a
It's
little
hard, so you might just describe it to us and point
trying
out.
to see if
It's on wheels, maybe.
There you go. Oh, well, that's true.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay,
Can those online see the screen?
yes, I'm sharing it.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, so we made basically a web page, and we know that all of you guys in your organizations
Let's
have
say
a.
Tricia made the webpage.
I was gonna say,
Give full credit
yeah.
to the author of this thing. It's a wonderful.
So this was based on all the feedback we got in the report. And we also solicited feedback from y'all kind of as we're putting it together. So really this kind of separates into three kind of groups of interested people. So you've got the customers, you've got people who operate a business. So when I'm talking about customers, I'm talking about residential customers. Of course, you've got business customers as well. And then some communication practices that were talked about during the testimony. So we've got a little bit of information here. And then we've got basically three portals that have a little bit of high view information, but then you can click on each to find more information. One of the things that we heard from y'all was we want to know what's happening with the prices. So we have several links for that. Thank you, MISO and SPP, that we blatantly linked to. And we also have some other resources as well. Energy Information Administration, daily prices, and so forth.
So for associations or those of you that represent multiple entities, I would encourage you, and we can share this link.
Absolutely.
And you can get this out to them so they can play around with it when it's not an emergency and see what's there and maybe let us know if there's other information that they would normally look at.
No, this is fantastic. Thank you.
So I'm gonna kind of go,
Johnny probably need to add that your outage map too.
it's in a different page.
Later on, yeah.
So as I said, there are kind of three different portals. So we'll go customers first, residential customers. And so we borrowed a little bit from the internet, thank you, ready.gov, for power outage tips. And some various recommendations that we heard from the natural gas group. And then in addition to that, we have a section that has every utility, including municipalities. Thank you very much, Travis. I know that was probably a big slog. A lot of these I was able to find just Googling, but Travis hunted down all the municipal contacts for who to contact during an outage. So thank you so much. So that has basically each of those. And then I thought we had, and maybe this is something to take home and fix. We did have the outage maps as a link. So I'll talk to our IT folks about making sure that that's on there. So if you guys have outage maps that you want us to share on here, I know where to find Entergy's, but may not know of some of the others. So let me know. The best practices for commercial industrial customers looks very similar. Some of the recommendations from the ready.gov are different. There's also some information from the Propane Education Research Council that Kevin Falster shared with me and have linked there. It has all kinds of different things for different kinds of emergencies. And then again, it has the who to contact in the event of a outage. And then over here, we've got just some of the communication things that you guys talked about during the testimony. So if there's additional things that you've learned that you want us to include in here, please let us know. As Secretary Zio mentioned, this is a living toolkit. So things for natural gas suppliers and propane distributors. I also had
the outage maps on an earlier version. And we'll make sure that gets in here. But that's just kind of an overview of what we have. Would love to add more, so we'll be listening.
Well, Tricia, we may want to, I mean, I know we have the cost data, maybe, and I guess that probably is more of a factor for maybe those that have discretion on ramping up and ramping down like a business or something. But even for the residential customer, maybe Andrew, you can speak to this in their presentation, as far as how they make that choice during the event to say, do I, do I turn my heat up or do I turn my heat down? Is there a cost impact to them or if they just want, out of goodwill, they want to make a difference if there's like a calculator that may reduce the cost to the grid if they're actually reducing the demand. I don't know, we can talk about that offline.
Yeah, we can talk about that. That seems like something the utilities did after the fact with the PSC.
Okay.
So I don't know that that's something that we could give real time.
Can't really do a real time thing, but it's just giving them guidance on, is there, if I reduce my electric by 25%, if you could build in whatever that spot price is of gas and say this could have an effect of reducing energy consumption.
This is intended as a clearinghouse. It doesn't supplant anybody's individual web page.
That's right. It links to those so that we can update it.
So that it's a clearinghouse of all the different web pages dealing with energy resources.
Start talking about reading the tariff.
I don't think the consumer's gonna understand the tariff and all, so, or the spot prices.
Tariff refers to another tariff.
And there's 3 riders. The spot prices don't show up on customers' bills.
I don't see that, yes.
And they really, the way we apply fuel and energy charges to customers, they don't see the spot prices. It's an average price that ultimately gets to customers.
We do have the spot prices linked from Energy Information Administration.
So at least they know when it jumps from $7 to $1,000, that maybe it might affect their bill. Is that a fair statement?
Definitely.
Gas
Be a
customers.
red,
And on gas customers.
link changes to red covered.
Yeah, gas customers
It goes to
and
red.
the commodity.
Yeah, the one caveat to John's comment would be our
Do we do have the link?
large gas customers
Yeah.
are using, procuring their own gas.
The large
And
gas,
may
they
go out to the
wanna go
spot
look
market
at
to
it.
to supplement their needs.
Yeah, and they should be monitoring that
Exactly.
as a
There should
routine
be.
operation.
Hopefully they
Hour,
won't-
yeah, they, minute to minute, hour to hour, watching that usually. And then also, is there a dashboard for active OFO order pipeline? Is that something that we might want to add to this?
I don't know what that is.
Is there an existing dashboard?
There was during Storm Uri. I'll report that.
Yeah, see if there's a link that, because we're not, this is really kind of being a warehouse as opposed to.
Yeah,
But they usually.
we're not trying to create something new. We're trying to be a clearinghouse for all that
Exactly,
good
and it's-
existing
I think it's just getting
information.
you the right.
Yes, I would,
Kind of a
we would
one-stop
love.
shop for everybody to.
I would also recommend linking to the plant protection and human needs affidavits that business customers need to have on file so that they can see that recommendation and then just kind of do it.
So
They'll
can
have
somebody
the
send
form
those
readily
to me?
available.
It's
We'll have to get with the pipeline company on the gas side.
Because it'll be all the
Johnson-
pipeline companies, right, with the gas, it'll be all the utilities, so
That's why we have.
this is only as good as what is fed.
I think John's about to talk.
And what I can
John's
easily Google.
presentation was clearing that up.
And there's not a single affidavit, it's each utility, or each pipeline would have one.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, and I think there's a link there, or there's a instruction on that webpage that says this is something you need to do, is to
Yes,
go to your pipelines provider and get that.
yeah,
I'm saying it'd be great if they can see that and then they have a form or they have a link where they can go get that affidavit and just do it on the spot.
so,
Instead of saying, you need to do this, and then they put it on their to-do list and then it doesn't get done.
Oh, you have a link into that.
I mean, that seems, that each of the pipelines is gonna have their own,
Well, there's only one gas
Well,
pipeline
but
that would be of large concern.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as, we can figure that out as a group, but as a customer, it seems like it would be in your interest. If I'm a pipeline customer, I know I need to have the affidavits, because my company is a pipeline customer. We have the affidavit ready to submit. So that's part of what I'm gonna tell you in just a second, is my advice to you is be aware and do it as a.
Yeah, no, all of the customers I represent are aware of this requirement, but you'd be shocked at the number of people that called me in the middle of this storm and said, we're getting our gas turned off. And I'm like, time to fix this was months ago, right?
Well, hopefully this helps.
There's a tip saying, do that.
Right, but what I'm saying is the tip, you're gonna have somebody that's probably a procurement manager at a plant that's reading this website and they're gonna go, oh, we need to do that. And they'll put it on a list of things they need to do along with, maintain the heat boiler or whatever. And then it's not gonna be done. But if it's at their fingertips and they're told to do it and they're given the link to the affidavit, they're told how to send it. I mean, we can get you that information.
If you can share anything that would be helpful, we'll definitely put it on there. So
Yes.
if that makes it a more full service type app, that's great. Just like your app, we can probably put a link to your app, ISO app, or I know Energy has an app for that.
Yeah, we need to add your app there. We have several links to your website.
But,
An app would be better than you.
Okay. We'll add it. Anything else?
What is is it the, hold on.
So this URL is a dummy because this is our dummy site. We haven't launched it yet.
Okay, so you don't have an address for it.
We don't yet. We will soon. We were planning on launching it, I think after this meeting, maybe taking back a little bit of the feedback and then
Okay.
it's gonna be a much shorter address than this and we can send it out to the group so that you can distribute to your stakeholders.
Well, and it's been a lot of work for Tricia. I know she's got a lot of hats she's wearing right now, and she's doing a fantastic job. So again, I appreciate the applause to her because I think it was meaningful work for her, but it's as good as the data and the information you give us. So continue to look at this and as you see a good idea, say, hey, that'd be great to put on that site, feel free to reach out. So thank you for today's presentation. And those of you watching online, perhaps you can, once we roll this out, you'll have a chance to access it. We'll probably, I assume we'll put a press release out on the availability that's coming in. And hopefully we can get some media coverage, being press media, that the public can know about it. So with that, I'm going to turn it to John Bethel, and then I'll come back to ERC members for further discussion.
Great, thanks. Larry asked me to touch on a couple of things, and so I'm gonna talk. One is the human needs affidavit, and I'm speaking of it in terms of the natural gas pipeline customers versus the local distribution company customers. And we've got folks here from the local distribution company that can talk about what their human needs affidavit process is. But if you are a customer of an interstate natural gas pipeline, they do provide, it's a human needs affidavit. So if you're not a human needs customer or you don't serve human needs customers, then that affidavit is not something that's available to you. But if you are, you should, there's a template in their federal energy regulatory tariffs. And so you can get the template, you can have that prepared. And when you receive that notice of a potential interruption of the operational flow order notification, you can then respond to that with the affidavit and say, I am a human needs customer, or I serve human needs customers, which is my company's situation. And then you're able to have a different order of priority in the curtailment, and you may be able to avoid curtailment. You may not be able to avoid curtailment entirely, but it certainly moves you up in the pecking order. And so, and that was one of the links we had suggested to the toolkit, was to have a piece of information that just says, be aware you need to do this. And that's a part of, again, if you're a qualifying customer, that's an option that's available to you. And I think Kenny mentioned that that's available at the local distribution company level as well.
Yeah.
And so that's a tool to have in your box. And again, it's a human needs issue, not an all customer issue.
Is this renewable on some cycle or some time frame?
It is per event, and you have it, that's you prepare it and you respond when you receive the notice of or the preparation to be curtailed is the point at which you provide the affidavit in response to that notification. And so it's an affidavit that you,
per event,
the form's there. And I mean, because per event, you get the notice from your pipeline, and per notice, you respond with the affidavit. And that's that's something that, and depending on, how many pipelines you're served by, you want to have that many affidavits prepared to respond to each one of those. And that should be a part of your relationship with your interstate pipeline. And again, also your relationship with your local distribution company, if you're a human customer or, and that would be hospitals, nursing homes, other assisted living facilities. And then in a utilities standpoint, it is those of us that serve those entities. And so we would qualify from that standpoint. A residential customer obviously couldn't ask for human needs affidavit because they don't qualify, and they don't qualify for interstate pipeline service anyway.
Well, and I guess you could theoretically have someone at risk at a home that would have a human need to not lose power, but that, I guess that's to be worked out at the local level.
Yeah, you try to identify to the greatest extent possible, and prioritize those customers in your order of curtailment, your order of restoration is you're working on that. But that's, I'll pause because that was one of my subjects, and that just.
And I have a question.
Yeah.
One of the testimony, a lot of testimony on industrial customers, potential significant equipment damage risk. And if fully curtailed, perhaps depending on that. And then also, like I mentioned, these facilities that might have access. Is there a venue for them to indicate? I thought there was something in the affidavit process that dealt with significant damage to equipment or to other risks besides human.
Yeah. And from that aspect, for customers that we have that are interruptible, we are in regular communication with those customers, and so those we know.
From an electric, but I'm
From
talking
electric,
about
now from gas, I can't talk about what they're.
Can distribution company standpoint?
Yeah, from an LDC perspective, how our tariff is written is can curtail customers up to a plant protection, essentially.
Maybe
What
that's what
do they need essentially to keep the
So
heat?
how do they communicate if they, if someone comes out to turn off their gas, how are they gonna get a notice and then they're gonna be able to kind of come back?
Yeah, they have to understand and know.
Is there a form they fill out to say we have this need, or do you just do it on a one-by-one basis?
It's on a one-by-one basis right now.
So-
Our customers.
So those are, I guess the message is if there are people like that, industries, they need to be in close communication with.
And these are the links you're talking about giving us to
Yes, sir.
make
There-
those forms available.
So
Well,
there,
there's not a form in this case, we just said.
well, there are templates. There are templates that FERC recommends, I think. So they would at least have, a go by. But there's also a plant protection
That's
affidavit
what I'm
which
talking about.
says,
Okay.
we have certain equipment that if it is frozen, it's a total loss. And so if you don't want to incur hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage to industrial equipment, you have to at least have enough service to keep the heat on so that that equipment doesn't freeze. And so you should be able to, for a CNI customer, have a plant protection affidavit on file that says we can be curtailed, but only back to 5% or whatever your firm need is to keep the heat on so that your equipment's not destroyed.
And that's still event by event.
That's my understanding, is that it has to be done on an ad hoc basis. But that's why I'm saying to have all this stuff at the fingertips of the plant operators is really valuable, so that they're not having to go, find this form on a FERC website, find the contact information for the pipeline.
And is there a template for that, or is that just?
My understanding is there is.
Okay.
Yes, sir. It's part of their FERC tariff.
Okay, well, that's good, and maybe we can improve that aspect of the toolkit to make that available to plant operators.
Yeah, one steps you can make beforehand, because
Right.
it still is reactive. It's not proactive, but it can be proactive in having the forms
Having
in the
it
back.
ready, yeah, and I think that's the reminder, is get your forms ready, so that if the event occurs, you have an immediate access to this.
And I don't want to come off as purely critical. Like, I think this toolkit is excellent. I mean, this is great. We're going to certainly disseminate that to the clients that we represent as soon as possible. But I think you can improve upon it.
Yeah, and that's the point, is we want to make sure it's meeting needs, so, but yeah, I agree, I think that's Awesome. So, you had a second topic?
Yeah,
Todd,
one was on the customer communications during the event and just kind of our experience during the event. Obviously, as Paul pointed out, it was an extreme and unusual event that we all encountered. And it was an event where the entire country was affected, which is rare because oftentimes you'll have an area affected and an area not affected, and you can, from an electric utility standpoint, you can borrow from one and help the other. But we ultimately ended up, obviously, where the ability to borrow from each other ended, and then we ultimately did experience, fortunately, a brief period of interruption. For us and for the other electric utilities in Arkansas, it was about an hour's period of time that the event happened, and it affected Southwest Power Pool and MISO utilities at a similar point in time during that day. And ours, we had approximately 60,000 customers that were affected, and the longest outage any individual customer experienced was about 40 minutes, and we interrupted our customers in groups of 20,000 and rolled those, and we were prepared to continue doing that for the duration of the load shed that was called by MISO. And so we, throughout the event and kind of on the same schedule Paul talked about, several days in advance we got the notice from MISO of conservative operations were going to be in effect. And so we began to communicate with our customers in a variety of ways, both in the news media, social media, emails, text messages, and individual customer contacts, depending on if they were managed accounts that had individual customer relationships. And we began to inform customers, here's what we're seeing, here's what we're expecting. For our interruptible customers, obviously we told them you're going to be subject to interruption and likely be interrupted during this event. And then for our general body of customers, we began to educate and advise them that take opportunities and steps to conserve energy that will help avoid load shed and ultimate outages that you'd have to experience. And so we, fortunately, and Paul talked about, it's an odd way to manage your grid, but it really for us proved to be a very effective way. Our customers responded very well to the education and the consistent messaging that went out and conserved. And I think that was a significant factor in avoiding more load shed than what we had. And so we are continuing to improve upon all those forms of communication. We actually improved on the fly because we learned some things each day about what we could do better. The one thing that is the most challenging thing is in the event of a load shed, you get about 10 minutes notice from the RTO that you're going to shed this much now. And so the ability to communicate with customers is very difficult. And that first group of customers, there wasn't much notice to that group of customers, but to the second group, we were able to know, okay, and our operators figured out, okay, these circuits. And so we knew, okay, this first group, sorry, you don't get much notice, but as we were going through that cycle, we were able to then move to the next group and give them a little bit more heads up. And we're still working on ways to make that communication more timely to the extent possible. Unfortunately, in that, ultimately, when you're in a load shed event, your ability to communicate is pretty limited because it's a pretty fast happening activity. The customers that get the greatest amount of notice are the interruptible customers that are already, there are built-in advanced communications for that group of customers. So that group's easy because that's part of the service relationship we have with those customers. But as you move away from that, your ability to have real quick communications is still challenging, but we're working on that, and we use text and emails and other forms of communication, and that's part of our normal outage system anyway. Is we've got a pretty good ability to communicate with customers as outage events are happening and saying you're out, and for the most part, are able to give them a pretty good estimate of here's what's happened and here's when we're going to get you back, depending on the scope of the damage. And and for the most part, we had a positive response from customers as far as appreciating the information and being able to have that information, that it was helpful. It's funny because some customers, and it still happens in the event of outages, you keep texting me about the leave me alone. I know the power's out and I know it's coming back, but it's just like, that's the minority. Most of them really do want to be informed, but it is funny because I've talked to, in my role, I get to talk to a lot of customers, or second and third hand customer information comes to me. And it's funny when you hear, y'all are giving me too much information. It's like, well, I don't hear that very often, but I hear it more than I would expect. But that was kind of the things, and it's like every time you go through an event like this, you do an after event kind of an analysis. Okay, what happened and how'd I do? What can I do better? And so, we learned both during and after the event, and continue to apply those lessons of, unfortunately, storms and things happen. So we experience outages on our system routinely. And so you begin to figure out how I can apply the lessons learned there, how I can learn more things there and apply them. And then even in the daily operations, as we're trying to improve communications with our customers, we're looking at those as well. We try to use a pretty broad suite of methods of communication to hopefully be able to, reach as many people as efficiently as we can.
John, I would echo that from OG&E's perspective. Probably during the event, the number one complaint we got was communication, and exactly like you said, it was very difficult because you just didn't know when that load shed was going to happen. And so I think it was a frustration on everyone's part. I think everyone involved, frustrated with the lack of being able to have the notice. Not that you didn't get it, it's just the facts were what they were. But during the event, I think we did get a lot of appreciation for service delivery, keeping the lights on, having a minimal load shed compared to all the news that was coming out of Texas. And so I think we too got a lot of appreciation from our customers, but the one thing they wanted more of was better communication if possible. But I think during the event, there was a lot of people coming together and kind of getting through it all together with, trying to manage their load some and all of that. But I think communication was the one thing that we've tried to improve on to the extent that we can. And Daryl, like you guys, we developed an app that we're still trying to get out, to help with that, and better communication with government officials, and just fine tuning that to the best degree that we can.
Something we experienced, I think, throughout this event, is something that we've done, and the state has done a good job of over the years of developing a communications network among the utilities and state government and local governments. And so during the event, there were times when I'd be on a call with Daryl and with other utility folks, as well as with representatives of the various state agencies, that you could educate them on here's the status, and then they were able to then pass that information on to their networks as well. And so there were opportunities to coordinate and then find out, what issues are there, what can I do, who needs help, and that sort of thing. So I think the state's emergency planning process has evolved over time and continues to get better and give all the affected entities opportunities to engage with each other.
And John, just give a little clarity though, when we're talking about those different levels, like we do, you're right, you only get 15 minutes when we say, hey, it's a load shed. You've already thought about hospitals and other different, critical loads, right, for the community. But something else, that when you're going through those steps, if you're in conservative ops, that's saying it's a warning sign, it's coming, right? It potentially could come. There's several steps where you've been in that space way before that. That entire day, you knew that was a possibility. So it's not a 15-minute warning. You've already been in that. You woke up. You woke up in it, right?
Yeah, it's when it's happening is when, but really do. We tried to say, hey, today is a day, and the day after that it was like, you saw what happened yesterday, it may happen today.
Right. So, yeah, it's people need to really read what it says.
Yeah, how does the utility, and you know, this doesn't have to be just Entergy that responds, how does the utility determine which customers to curtail? You know, is that done in real time? Is there advanced planning? It seems to me if you're a customer that's kind of on the chopping block and you know you're in that first group of customers that will be curtailed, you could say,
There's a lot of
you know,
factors.
look, we run our simulation.
As a utility, you have to know who your customers are that can do it. They have a generator on site that can cover their stuff and you can curtail their load. You have to know what is on what each feeder and what can be turned off at that time. You have to advance plan that and have that communication with everybody out there.
You talk about residential.
It has the rolling.
Yes.
Yeah, how about the rolling?
Yeah, if there's a rolling blackout, I mean, is there advanced planning where you kind of just decide in real time, we're gonna cut this circuit?
For us, it was dynamic, that to the extent that you didn't know what the level of load shed you were gonna be called upon. And then once you knew this is the amount, then you began to hit, okay, these circuits, and it kind of depends on where within your system even, where they say, this is where you need to shed, and whether it's total system or not, so it's.
And which ones already, which ones remain on currently.
Selecting?
But as you said, John, it's practice, right? I mean, so there are models that are put into practice and then put into play when the situation calls for that particular model to go into effect.
And some customers are already out, right? So if those customers are out, and that shifts the plan because you can't reduce load in areas where it's not on.
But is
So
it
it's-
geographic then, John? I mean, when you say, okay, we've got to curtail 60,000 customers, or you're going, right, we need to curtail everybody that's in the Ozarks, or we need to curtail everybody that's in Russellville, or, I mean, how are you determining what 60,000 are going to get it?
The, you know, the episode in 21 was system-wide for us, or statewide anyway, Arkansas. And so we looked for this amount of load, and we were able to break that down into 20,000, groups of 20,000 customers at a time. And we tried to spread it around the system to the greatest extent possible, and then moved it. And you know, and people smarter than I am were actually doing that because, but it was our distribution operations group that knew these circuits add up to that many megawatts that we had to shed. And then here's another group that's going to add up to that level. So it was kind of a matter of grouping circuits together that you could take out. And we knew going in that we wanted to do it in a way that limited the effect on any given group of customers. And so it was a matter of figuring out, okay, here's the first tranche, here's the second tranche, and it was more in real time than not, just because, you know, you didn't know until a short period of time before what the actual magnitude of the shed was. That was our experience.
And I just interject there. I think that might be an opportunity for this council at some point, because as a gas company, local distribution company, rolling blackouts don't necessarily affect our customers, but during that load shed event, if you can imagine, if our system was already stretched as well, it performed very well, but we're seeing very low pressures. So as you know, Entergy's distribution ops centers were making decisions about where there were going to be electric blackouts. If we were experiencing low gas pressure in that area, as well as a gas provider, you know, those houses or those customers being out for 40 minutes, temperatures of the houses dropped. A potential cascading event is when they turn the power back on to those 20,000 customers, you lose the diversity factor, right? You get 100% diversity. Everybody's furnace comes on at the same time, and you potentially have a cascading natural gas event now that we lost pressure and lost service to those 20,000 customers that were just out. So there might be an opportunity for, you know, the electric utilities and the gas utilities to coordinate better. So we, as a gas distribution company, we could provide input through our control centers to the electric utilities, so they know where we're experiencing low pressures. So they could consider that as they're thinking about which circuits to drop.
Well, that's an excellent point, and I think that's the benefit of this conversation, is that knowing that their decision may impact and exacerbate a problem on your end? Or how do you take that into account? And sometimes you can't take into account everything, but you can at least
Provide
minimize
the
it.
information, please.
And I always talk about that I was in that first group of 20,000 as an agency customer. So
And maybe let me know right quick that you was.
it was fine because it came back on in 40 minutes. And for you, for
I
that,
check my power.
I'm sorry. I'm not finished. For the natural gas company, I didn't have a natural gas line in my house, so you didn't get disrupted at all. I think maybe they took that into account because they picked the area that there wasn't a natural gas service line. There you go. So maybe you could say, we already do that. But I have neighbors with generators, so I was happy. But I did not have a generator myself. But the good news is, I think and I appreciate Laura's comment during the hearing, but what I think as a consumer and what my neighbors, because believe me, there was a lot of texting around neighbors within a minute of that happening. But it wasn't so much that the powers out, they had been all getting the warnings, cut your usage of electricity, you may have a rollout, so we all knew it was possible. But when it happened, everybody goes, well, is this a rollout? Or did the transformer go out because it's about to get a lot colder and I'm gonna get out of this neighborhood while I can before it ices in? Because once it iced in, we weren't gonna get out. So there was a lot of anxiety for about 10 minutes to say, is this something that was intentionally done, or is this something that is an equipment failure that can last days as opposed to 20 minutes? So that kind of information, I know, and y'all have done a good job on your app. So anything you can, when it happens and it's an intentional to say, this is a rollout, not a equipment failure, would be helpful, I think, to the customer, and at least the anxiety in the neighborhood, and they won't call all, I think, the president of the company got a number of calls from my neighbors, so that maybe she won't have her phone ringing off the wall. I don't remember reaching out, but I may have. I think we had neighbors saying they got different answers, so apparently some of the different answers, but we were happy that it came on. I thought Entergy and all the utility companies did a stellar job, and I appreciate everything they do. So I just give that tidbit as an end user customer that was without a generator, that was anxious about not that first 40 minutes, but maybe the next day. So anyway, with that, I think we have, I would like to turn for a minute. We're running short or close to time. I want to spend a minute or maybe a few minutes talking about the liquefied petroleum, and thank you to our propane board. I don't know if we lost our director here. He wasn't in the room.
He's been there.
I
guess I'm the.
But I would like,
Propane fire generator.
there you go.
When your pressure's low.
You have something, I think.
Something we're thinking about.
Before the meetings, we talked a little bit about, let's not maybe dwell on what happened last time, because I think we did have to call, I know the National Guard was out helping deliver propane. I think there was some.
I'm just gonna talk about the supply.
But I think the supply, obviously the word to the consumer on propane is, by now, don't wait. Or should have bought in the summer when it was cheaper, but get your tanks full. Don't wait till the event and expect a delivery that week when the forecast comes out that next week we're gonna have an ice storm. So, but if you could kind of get to the point of how do we get that propane supply into the state and some of the risks we have coming up this
Well,
winter.
our main problem in Arkansas is we do not have a big cabinet or storage facility for propane. And when an emergency hits, we have tank farms and different pipeline terminals. But they have tank farms, and they're not on a dedicated propane pipeline. They're on a multi-purpose pipeline. So when a real cold spell hits, those tank farms get depleted quickly. For instance, I'm in Jonesboro, and I don't have to pull propane from Demopolis, Alabama, or Hattiesburg, Mississippi this winter. I do every winter in northeast Arkansas. Now, northwest Arkansas is a little different. They can go to Conway, Kansas, where there's a big storage facility, or Tulsa, where all the refineries are. But our problem is trucks, transports, don't have enough of them. We need the hours of service lifted before the emergency arrives. And I noticed you said NHTSA has a 2 meteorologists on staff, and you guys, weather predictions.
our supplier do too. It would be nice if you could share that with this board. We need to have our emergency hours of listed on the transport drivers way before the emergency ever hits. So they can get product to the dealers. So they'll immediately, when it hits the emergency or the announcement of the emergency hits, everybody's gonna run to get the tanks filled. It's gonna pull those tank farms down. I'm gonna pull a long distance. Now, the driver, I'm just gonna give you an idea of how a transport driver looks through his day. He wakes up in the morning, he's got 14 hours to make as many deliveries as possible. If he's making deliveries 50 miles, 100 miles, that's a little bit different. They make 2 or 3 or 4 miles. But if he has to go to Hattiesburg, Alabama, Mississippi, from Jonesboro, he'll be lucky to make that trip and get back in that 14-hour period. He has 11 hours he can drive. And once the bell rings, he's got to stop wherever he's at. So if he gets down there and there's a wreck, a long line, get loaded, he's not going to make it back. He may make it back to Hot Springs, Mississippi, but has to spend the night. Then he's still got 2.5, 3 hours to get to Jonesboro. So he's behind the 8 ball before he ever starts the next day. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. Now, from what I understand, reading a little bit about the emergency services that the governor can do, he can do 3 consecutive 30-day hours of service, emergency service lifting, which he looked at it from, say, the end of December, all the way through February. That would very well help us out a bunch. Because we can't get other transports from, say, the south coming up. Also, and the weather doesn't necessarily have to be in Arkansas. I've been in business a long time. And there's been times when it's been extremely cold in Missouri and north. So when that happens, they run out of product, they start coming to the south and pulling our product from us, from our tank farms. We get pushed to the south. One day after the other. I think it was in 13, just to give you an idea of how it worked. I pulled a load out of Carthage, Missouri. I did pull it out of Carthage because the price had swung, freighters would let me do it. I got a load, the next day said, you're out of here. Went to Hattiesburg, I got a load there, you're out of here. The next day, I was pulling from Bellevue, Texas, Houston. It's fortunate for me that my transport people were licensed in Texas. 4 days later, everybody in the world was pulling from Bellevue, Texas. I paid $75 an hour for a truck that sat there for 35 hours to get a load. And was damn proud to get it. Okay. Now I manage my storage is I cram it full, and just as soon as they put another gallon in it, I do it. Not everybody can do that. But we just need, the only answer for us is to get the hours of service for the drivers emergency declared and have those lifted. Or we're gonna be right back in the same boat.
So does any propane come into Arkansas other than truck?
Yes,
All
it comes through the Enterprise Products pipeline, but it's not a dedicated pipeline. They're also running diesel, gas, and everything else through there. I'm assuming natural gas as well. So they've got windows and that's preset. So if they pull the tank farms down real quickly, and then the next load coming up the pipeline is not going to be for 4, 5, 6 days, well, you've already depleted. If you don't go somewhere else, you've already depleted. Like say, I've already depleted my storage.
And the state does not have any underground storage other than
Not that I'm aware of.
above ground tank storage.
Yeah, not I'm aware of. And just recently, there was one closed in Carthage, Missouri, 6 million gallons. That cavern was closed. So there's those guys from northern Arkansas, from north central Arkansas, say Hardy and that home, they go up there and pull from Carthage. A lot of the northwest would pull from Carthage. There's 6 million gallons of storage that's not there anymore.
And that happened this year.
In April this year.
So that's an additional risk that we have.
Additional risk.
That's an important point. I know there's some legislation that the department has offered up to the governor's office around enhancing our storage capability.
I don't know if the long gas reservoir would work for propane.
But it may be that we need to evaluate other storage. We're looking at expanding. We have natural gas storage field in Portsmouth, two of them, which did help us get through, as I understand it.
Black Hills.
Black Hills, y'all were able to pull out of that storage field, which allowed us not to worry about those frozen wells so much, right, in Arkansas. Now, Oklahoma anecdotally told me that they had completed all their storage in September, I guess on a cost basis, and so they went into the storm empty, which I guess I said, well, maybe next year they'll fill it up. They won't deplete it in September, they'll wait till March to deplete it, you know, or something, but, and refill it. So, I mean, those are the kind of things that I think we can learn from. But I don't know, on the propane side, I know there was an action by the governor to live down in service or whatever you call it. But perhaps it took a little bit of time and coordination to do that.
Well, he did do that. But it was after the weather hit.
After it already hit.
And then the roads got bad. And then the transports were parked.
Right. So it was too much.
We lost 4 or 5 days. If, you know, if we can have a 2-week warning period, do it. Lift the hours of service and then let it go. It would be a tremendous help to us.
Well, maybe we can coordinate better with y'all's mayor. We have one on staff too, although, and I mean, that's something, maybe it would be helpful to track that and see if there's a forecasted event that we can get 2 weeks ahead, or I'm not sure how that works, so we can look at that and talk to the governor's office about the willingness. I know it requires coordination with Mississippi also, right?
Yes, other states around, but Mississippi and Louisiana, I'm sure.
All right.
Oklahoma as well.
How do you plan the volume of tank storage that you have? I mean, would another option potentially be to help you, be to incentivize additional
Yes,
tank storage?
if you get it, you know, I'm gonna wait you do that's gonna change, right? For dealers, yeah. Not everybody's got enough storage, just for sure, that's their own. I fortunately have not, knocked on wood somewhere, not ran out, but it was getting pretty close last year when the transports parked on ice. So I was beginning to really worry about it. We made it through.
And I just draw a lot of parallels between gas storage and propane storage. The more storage you have, the longer you can ride out an event potentially.
So is there a specific recommendation you have for this winter that we would need to take up?
It's something I just gave it to you, just when you have an
The hours
event
of
come.
service?
And we're so short on drivers right now that it's, it maybe not have to be a weather event.
All right, well, I know we're nearing the hour. Is there, I guess, I don't know what time it is, my watch is gone. But, okay, it's actually, we're 2 minutes over. I was gonna open it up if anybody had any last minute comments. Is there something that needs to be?
I just wanted to address the price gouging.
Oh, yeah, we had that question.
Question. I've been on my phone, texting my office to see what investigations we have. We do still have one ongoing. I can't tell you who it is. I understand though that y'all probably can guess who it is. It is a gas supplier. But it seems like it might be obvious that it could be price gouging, but even in the simplest case, price gouging is difficult to prove because there are certain elements that have to be proven. 10%, the governor has to declare it, I think, an emergency situation. You know, if the upline of whoever is in the chain is charging more than that company or that entity is not necessarily guilty of price gouging, those kinds of things. So especially in this space, it's much more difficult to prove. So it's an ongoing investigation. It's taking a long time. There is one still open. So maybe there will be something come out of it eventually.
Should we look at changes in the laws to make it easier to prove or to deter that kind of conduct? I mean, it seems like whatever we're doing isn't really deterring the conduct.
I would urge you to do that, especially in something like this, in this kind of situation.
Maybe we should follow up with someone in your office and we can talk about trying to collaborate on a way to strengthen the law in that area so that it actually will deter the conduct when we need it.
Well, that law is much more applicable, broadly applied to lots of other products and situations when they occur, such as tornadoes, hurricanes, that
Well, we
type
could
of
make
thing.
it more
So
nuanced.
be careful what you wish for.
No, I understand that, Brett, but we can make it more nuanced.
And it has to
Could
be
write
in certain, like,
a law
Yeah.
that doesn't apply to every commodity.
well, that's a good point, and I think, I know that several states, and I know that with efforts to help municipalities that face those high costs, and hopefully, hopefully this is a 100-year event, but we've had 3 100-year events in the last 3 years, so a flood, an ice storm, and a pandemic, so let's all hope that we don't see another 100-year event in the next couple of years, but, or a repeat of that. So the governor has lived through a lot of unprecedented times.
Jessica said I brought it all here.
Oh, you got it. That's right. It's all there. So anyway, with that, I'm gonna probably call this meeting, but I want to make sure, can I get some feedback? The frequency of meeting, do y'all want to revisit? I mean, we'll be rolling the toolkit out to you, give you a notice on when it's available. Tricia, is that probably whatever you think, we have a time frame, or do you want to talk about that?
It's not gonna work, it's just waiting for your report.
Okay, so we'll be taking that up in the next week or so.
So this is not our last meeting, so we will have a change in administration, and this governor is currently in office. May just happen at the next one, going to continue this, are we aware?
That's something we identified that in our transition documentation to the governor's office. They've included the role of this council that will be forwarded to the next governor.
So
and
whoever the
ultimately,
new
the next
governor will be made
governor
aware.
will be aware of the importance of this council, how it was formed and how it serves. And obviously your feedback going forward, I'm sure to the governor will be helpful in terms of if you feel like this is a valuable conversation and working group and what, but I guess I would just ask, I think at this point, our frequency, we were looking at maybe an annual discussion, but once we get the toolkit going, but if you feel like we need to see everybody more frequently, that's something we can recommend as well. So is there a preference on what we recommend on frequency?
Well, based on all recommendations, they need to be more than maybe.
Okay. You think it's quarterly?
Maybe quarterly.
Maybe a spring and fall or a quarterly, yeah, just kind of before the extreme weather.
Spring and fall is what we did this year. Was that a good pace or do you think? you
Yeah, I
need
think
to-
on the backside of winter and then.
Okay.
Before we eat.
See how we did.
Yeah.
We'll.
I'll say before vote.
Yeah, that'd be great. Before, we want to, and I was gonna say the whole Girl Scout in me comes out, be prepared, the motto is be prepared, right? So, Jordan, do you have something?
No, I was just gonna say, Garrett was suggesting we do it on the backside of the winter and we can kind of see how we fare. It can be, we made it through, here's areas where we could have used more help and so on.
Okay, good recommendation. All right, with that, I'm gonna, I guess, dismiss and thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Larry's driving me around.